Every week we talk to Jonathan Halevi about what's going on in the Middle East. He uses Arabic language skills to bring us YouTube videos that terrify me. Well, today we're talking to a man who has studied Arabia and the Middle East at large for decades. One of the world's leading experts. His name is Dr. Daniel Pipes. He's the president of the Middle East Forum, and he joins us live in Toronto. Thanks for being here.
Delighted to be here.
You know, we've talked to you by satellite before. Indeed. It's wonderful to have you in Toronto. What brings you to our fair city?
I'm giving some talks at York University and elsewhere.
Let's just put on TV right now. We have an ad for an event you're doing. If folks are watching the 5 p.m. showing, you can see Dr. Pipes at 7:30 p.m. tonight at 55 Yeomans Road, Toronto. Let's talk first about Libya. It's the news of the week, but in a way, it's a microcosm of what's going on all over the Arab world. Is anything better now that Gadaffi is gone, looking at his successor, Abdul Jalil?
I think the chances are that we will long for the days of Gadaffi. Gadaffi was a horror. Let's not mince words. But he was most horrible from 1969 when he took over to 1986 when he was bombed by U.S. forces. Since 2002 and until this year, he'd been pretty quiet, and he'd paid reparations for damage he'd done to airline victims. He destroyed his nuclear infrastructure. He wasn't a problem. Then this year he was, of course, loathsome again. But he hasn't been a problem to the outside world. He's been eccentric and loathsome. Now what we have, it appears, are Islamists who are in charge, who are not eccentric, who are part of a much larger worldwide phenomenon, who are far more dangerous. So I worry that NATO, our own forces, supported the coming to power of an Islamist regime. Not sure, not clear, but it looks that way.
You know, it's funny you say that because Canada was a major participant. We had over 500 Canadian forces involved, both on a naval ship and our jets were pounding away there. Yet our Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, said the greatest threat to the world, in his opinion, was what he used the phrase Islamicism. I think he meant Islamism. I think there's a confusion there. There's a contradiction. I mean, our Prime Minister knows the threat of radical Islam, yet he was doing the bidding of Abdul Jalil and a group that is sympathetic to Al-Qaeda, sympathetic to Sharia law, and like you said, doesn't have the wackiness of Gadaffi.
This began as a humanitarian effort. There were 600,000 in Benghazi in March who looked like they could come under the assault of Gadaffi. But, as you well know, the original impulse to protect them translated into a manhunt for Gadaffi. And I don't think that was wise. I don't think that's what we want to do. I have no problem with protecting the Benghazi population. I did a big problem with supporting a side whose nature we did not understand and which is now coming to light, as you suggested.
Now, you said we didn't understand the nature. Well, I sure didn't. But did Barack Obama, did Hillary Clinton, did our own Prime Minister or Foreign Minister?
No.
So we were just sort of gambling that the new guy would be better than the old guy. Exactly. Did we have any hand in choosing Abdul Jalil?
Not so far as I know.
This National Transitional Coalition, who set it up?
It was one of these spontaneous things in Benghazi back in February and March, and certainly outside power, so far as I know, had no role in that at all.
Huh. Now, we have essentially handed over a government and, frankly, billions of barrels of oil to this fellow who used to be Gaddafi's justice minister. Mm-hmm. What restraints do we have on him now that we installed him as the de facto dictator?
I don't see any.
Well, who's the grown-up? I mean, here's the thing. Gaddafi couldn't go head-to-head with NATO in the end, but he was certainly strong enough to roll back the ragtag militias against him. Is this successor, Abdul Jalil, is he strong without NATO support? I see Russia is condemning the shooting of Gaddafi. Is Russia trying to insinuate itself? Is China? Who's really the power? Is NATO still the power?
Insofar as there is a power other than the Libyans, yes, it's NATO. Russians and Chinese are not there. NATO's there. And has indicated the forces will be taken out shortly, or the sorties will be ended shortly. And so the Libyans are on their own. Now, it's worth noting that the origins of the National Transition Council were in a protest against a large number of Islamists who were massacred 15 years ago in a Libyan prison. So the fundamental concern of the NTC from the start was the Islamists and how badly they were treated. And they were very badly treated, no argument, by Gaddafi. So there is an Islamist core to this.
Do we see ties to Saudi Arabia or Iran? Where do those two countries stand?
Not really. Insofar as there are ties to anyone, it would be to Al-Qaeda and to the Afghan Mujahideen. That is where the experience came in the 1980s. That was the basis for the Libyan organizations that were attacking Gaddafi's forces. No, they're not. They're not. So far as I know, they're not connected to either Iran or Saudi Arabia.
Now, since Muammar Gaddafi blinked after the United States invaded Iraq, when Gaddafi basically abandoned his nuclear program, paid reparations, and tried to reconcile himself with the West, we saw a lot of commercial ties formed, especially between Europe. In the UK, France, Italy, they built an underwater pipeline for Italy to get its natural gas. Will those commercial interests from Europe dominate the politics of Libya?
Presumably they will, but I think the larger message that this sent to tyrants around the world is don't give up your nuclear program. This was not I took satisfaction in seeing Gaddafi's demise. I've been watching him for his entire career and my entire career. But at the same time, if you put aside the emotional satisfaction, this is not a strategically intelligent move. Here's a guy who's more or less come in from the cold, and we are party to his destruction. Is that wise? Is that a signal you want to send to others? Say the North Koreans or others that you make any moves in our direction, you pay the ultimate price?
Well, and that's a good point, because Hosni Mubarak, for all his flaws, also more or less stood with the West against the Islamists, and Obama did nothing to prop him up.
Same with Ben Ali of Tunisia. Yet with Assad of Syria, we're quite deferential. Now, with time, it's become a little tougher, but we're sending a signal: if you're on our side or come to our side in any way, we'll go after you. If you are really hostile to us, as the Iranian and Syrian governments are, then we'll be respectful of you.
I have reread Barack Obama's speech in Cairo in 2009 several times. That was his first olive branch to the Muslim world. And he talked about democracy in a very troubling way from my mind. He said, it's basically whatever you make it. And the only freedom he talked about was not freedom of, let's say, women in the Arab world, but freedom of women in America to wear hijabs. I found it a backwards speech. Do you think that the unfolding events in the Ring of Fire, I don't even want to use the phrase Arab Spring because I don't think it's accurate. Do you think that these unfolding events, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, Syria, are a plan from Barack Obama, or do you think they're the result of a man out of his league, out of his depth, and people have detected that, and Jimmy Carter style, things are happening despite Obama?
I would say neither. I would say that this was a spontaneous development in the Arabic-speaking countries, that there had been a stasis that had gone on for decades, and finally something happened. It began in an obscure Tunisian town with a produce and fruit vendor who was slapped and self-immolated. No, I do think it was spontaneous. But what is curious is that Obama made this major effort, very vocal effort, to reach out to Muslims. And yet if you look at survey research, well, let me start by saying that Bush had very low standing, and then Obama had much higher standing. But if you look at recent survey polls, it goes right back to where Bush was. So this whole grand effort has led to nothing.
Well, I mean, if I may quote the late Osama bin Laden, people look at the strong horse and the weak horse, and they support the strong horse. Do you think Obama has any strength or credibility in the region? I mean, what does he even stand for now?
Well, it's partly that, but it's also partly the policies he's pursued. His policies have not been popular, whether they be on Al-Qaeda or Arab Israel or Libya. They're not popular. He's disliked as much as Bush.
Stay right there. I've got so many more questions for you after the breaks, folks. We're going to talk to Daniel Pipes about Turkey and why Dr. Pipes believes that may be the most dangerous state in the region. That's next on The Source. Over the weekend, there was a massive earthquake in Turkey, and Israel offered to send help. Today, Turkey said, yeah, no thanks, we don't want your Jewish help. Joining me today is Daniel Pipes, president of the Middle East Forum. What do you make of the fact that, 10 years ago, Turkey and Israel, I'd call them almost best friends in the region. Now Turkey is trying to present itself as the regional counterweight, a new Ottoman empire to take on the Jewish state. What went wrong?
That's a good question. I think it's going to be much asked in the years to come. What went wrong? The simple answer is that the Islamists took over. And cleverly, they managed to sideline the seculars, in particular the officer corps of the Turkish military.
And how did they do that?
They did it by providing good governance. In their first years, they took over in 2002. In their first years, they stood for economic growth and dealing with outstanding issues, and their popularity soared. They got 34% of the vote in 2002, And then 2007 they got 46, and this year they got 50. So they've been doing a good job.
Now, Turkey was once called the sick man of Europe almost 100 years ago, but then Kemal Ataturk took that country and pulled it into the 20th century, gave women the right to vote, secularized it, gave them the Latin script alphabet. I mean, they write Turkish in English letters. How can that really be undone in 10 years? Can a century, almost a century of liberalism be undone?
Put it this way. It took Ataturk 15 years between 1923 and 1938 to impose these changes you just mentioned and more. And so far, it's 9 years since the AKP has been in power, and they're undoing it. Yeah. Just about as fast as Ataturk was doing it.
Huh. Do you think they'll abandon the English, Latin script?
Some things are permanent, but that's symbolic. In the more significant ways, they're undoing what Ataturk did. Now, I like to say that Ataturk created the first Turkish Republic in 1923, and Erdogan, the Prime Minister of Turkey, created the second Turkish Republic just 2 months ago, or 3 months ago now, in late July, when most of the chiefs of staff of the military resigned from us.
And did they resign, saying, if you don't obey us, we'll resign? And Erdogan said...
They just resigned. They lost an important battle, they resigned, and now what we see is political control of the military. Now, in principle, that's a good thing. I'm glad in our countries we have political control of the military. In Turkey, I like to see the military autonomous and keeping track of what's taking place in the political arena, and that's over. We now have the second Turkish Republic of Erdogan.
In the 90s, it was thought that Turkey should be bolted to Europe. It should be brought into the European Union and westernized, even though it was still poor and had financial problems. Do you think the chance, do we lose that chance? Or was that even a real chance? Was that just a dream of Europeans to expand their own political unit?
In retrospect, I'm glad that didn't happen. I don't think Turkey should be in Europe. I don't think it's European. I don't think it's good for Turkey, nor do I think it's good for Europe. So I'm glad it hasn't happened, and I'm quite sure it's not going to happen. You know, it's somewhat arbitrary, the fact that Europe has been deemed to go to the Bosphorus, and part of Turkey is on the western side of the Bosphorus, makes it Europe. That'd be like saying that if Gibraltar were not under British control, but were under Moroccan control, does that make Morocco a European country, just having a sliver of what's called Europe? No. No, it's not Europe. It's Middle Eastern. It's Islamic.
Now, look, Egypt for a long time, I mean, there's always Arab and Muslim leaders that say, I am the leader of all Arabia or all Islam. It's been Egypt in the past. In a way, Gadaffi himself tried it with an African flavor. How can it be that ethnic Turks, who are not Arabs, can say we are the leader of the Muslim world? And how does that rival the Persian Muslims, who say we're the leader of the region?
Well, the simple answer is that Turks were the leaders of the Muslim world for centuries. The Ottoman Turks ruled from 1300 to 1923, and for much of that period were the most powerful.
They were all the way up in Spain. Right. Am I mixing up my? That's the Moors.
But it was a very large dynasty that ruled for a very long time, and so there is still a sensibility in Turkey that they are the natural leaders. But you're absolutely right to point to Iran. That is the rival, the historic rival, and increasingly the present-day rival. And I think the two key countries of the Middle East today are Turkey and Iran, not the Arabic-speaking countries.
How does Saudi Arabia fit in? They've got all the oil, they got the cash. They're worried. I mean, whose side are they on between Iran and Turkey? Or are they trying to be on their own polar?
They're trying to be on their own, but they just don't have the manpower, the strength, the economy. They've got oil, but that's not everything. Iran and Turkey are the two countries. And Iran, let me point out that Iran, although today's major problem with the terrorism, with the radicalism, with the building up of nuclear weapons, I think potentially, before too very long, is the solution, is the friendly country.
How does that happen?
Because the population of Iran is widely disaffected from the regime. I compare it to the 1970s in the Soviet Union, when you had a strong and bellicose state, but a hollow state because its subject population rejected this ideology and wanted out. Well, likewise in Iran today. So what we have is a fascinating phenomenon where Turkey is moving away and Iran is potentially moving in our direction.
Now, give us a recap for the population, because Iran really is, in many legitimate ways, a regional superpower in terms of population, history, diplomacy, military. I mean, they have been a serious state for millennia. Can you give us a quick rundown of some numbers in terms of population of Iran, Turkey, Egypt, population-wise and economic-wise?
All those have a population in the 70 millions. Turkey has the only real economy of the three, though it's heading for a crash, not a crash, but problems with credit, I think, quite soon. But it's a real economy with hard work. Egypt is mired in poverty and it's getting worse with the political troubles, importing a huge amount of food, massive unemployment, real problems. And Iran could be a flourishing state, but due to mismanagement and due to sanctions and due to ideological problems, is having real economic troubles, which could well be an important element in the undoing of the Islamic Republic.
I feel it's a race between those who would throw off the Ayatollahs and their ability to get a nuclear weapon. Do you think that Israel or America or the NATO or the West will take a military strike against Iran to preempt them
That
getting...
is the $64 question.
What's your answer?
I'm inclined to think yes. I mean, I'm hoping that the Iranians themselves will take care of this issue by overthrowing the regime, but should that not happen, I do think more likely than not that either the Israeli or American leadership will take military steps to stop it.
Daniel Pipes, I'm very grateful for your visit today. I wish you well in your visit to Canada. Hope to have you on the show again.